I didn't know 4 days could disappear from my life without leaving a single clear memory behind. But they did. And what happened in that town still keeps me awake at night. I'm 29 years old, and at the time this started, I was freshly separated from my husband. Not divorced yet, just that strange, heavy space where you're no longer together, but not fully apart either. The kind of silence that fills a house and presses on your chest when you wake up in the morning and realize the other side of the bed is still cold. After 2 years of living together, everything fell apart in a way that didn't even feel dramatic. No screaming, no plates thrown, just exhaustion. Conversations that went in circles. Long pauses where we both knew what the other was thinking but didn't have the energy to say it out loud. Eventually, we agreed to separate. He stayed. I packed a bag. At first, I told myself I was fine. I told my friends I just needed space. But the truth is, I felt like I was unraveling. Every familiar street reminded me of something we used to do together. Every grocery store aisle had some memory attached to it. I couldn't even stand in my own kitchen without feeling like I was trespassing in a life that no longer belonged to me. That's when I thought of my grandmother. She lived in another state, in a very small town. The kind of town people joke about. One main road, a few grocery stores, one diner everyone swears has the best pie in the world, a place where nothing ever seems to change, and everyone knows everyone else's business whether they want to or not. Growing up, I spent summers there, long, slow days, crickets at night, screen doors slamming. My grandmother always smelled like lavender and clean laundry, and her house felt like it existed outside of time. Safe, steady, untouched by whatever chaos was happening in the rest of the world. So I packed my car and drove. I didn't overthink it. I didn't tell many people. I just wanted to disappear for a bit and breathe somewhere that didn't constantly remind me of what I'd lost. I told myself I'd stay a few days, maybe a week, just long enough to get my head straight. When I arrived, my grandmother was standing on the porch like she'd been waiting for me all day. She smiled the second she saw me, that soft, familiar smile that made my chest loosen for the first time in weeks. She hugged me tightly, held me longer than usual, and said, "You look tired, sweetheart." I laughed it off and told her I was fine. Everyone always says that, even when they're clearly not. Her house looked exactly the same. Same faded couch, same old clock ticking too loudly in the hallway, same framed photos of family members who had been gone for years. It was comforting in a way I didn't realize I needed so badly. That first night, I slept better than I had in months. By the third day, I felt lighter. Not happy exactly, but calmer. Like my nervous system was finally unclenching. I helped her cook. We watched old TV shows. I sat on the porch in the evenings and listened to the bugs hum in the dark. For the first time since the separation, I wasn't constantly replaying arguments in my head. But that's also when the strange feelings started. At first, it was subtle, just a sense that I wasn't alone when I knew I should be. I'd be washing dishes and suddenly feel like someone was standing behind me, close enough that I could almost feel their breath. Every time I turned around, there was nothing there. I brushed it off. Old houses make noises, small towns are quiet, so every sound feels louder, and grief does weird things to your brain. Then I started hearing rustling at night, not the normal kind, not mice in the walls or the wind outside. This sounded closer, like movement right outside my window, like someone shifting their weight on gravel. The first night it happened, I sat up in bed, heart racing, and listened. The sound stopped as soon as I focused on it. I waited. Nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself I was imagining it and went back to sleep. The second night, it happened again. This time, I got up. I peeked through the curtains, then opened the back door and stepped outside barefoot, feeling ridiculous for being scared of shadows. The yard was empty. The air was still. No footsteps. No branches moving. Just silence so thick it made my ears ring. I went back inside and locked the door, annoyed at myself. By the third night, I didn't even get out of bed. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint rustling come and go like it was testing me, like it knew I was awake. During the day, things weren't much better. People stared at me. At first, I thought I was being paranoid. Small towns aren't exactly subtle when someone new shows up. I was clearly an outsider. Different car, different clothes, different way of carrying myself. Of course, people noticed. But there was something off about the way they looked at me. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't friendliness. It wasn't even the usual small-town judgment. It felt hostile, like they recognized me, but not in a good way. The first time it really hit me was at the grocery store. I walked in, grabbed a basket, and headed for the produce section. The cashier, an older woman with tight lips and sharp eyes, kept watching me, not glancing, watching. Her gaze followed me down the aisles. When I went to check out, she didn't greet me, didn't smile. She just stared, her eyes narrowing slightly, like she was looking at something unpleasant she couldn't quite place. I tried to be polite. I smiled. I said hello. She didn't respond. Her hands moved stiffly as she scanned my items. When she finally looked up, the disgust on her face made my stomach drop. I felt like I'd done something wrong without knowing what it was. I left the store shaking, telling myself I was overreacting. But it didn't stop there. Over the next couple of days, I noticed the same looks everywhere. People pausing mid-conversation when I walked by. Porch doors closing quietly, curtains shifting. Even at my grandmother's house, I started to feel uneasy. She seemed normal, warm, kind, exactly how I remembered her. But sometimes I'd catch her watching me with this unreadable expression, like she wanted to say something but didn't know how. I told myself I was just tired, emotionally raw. My brain was filling in gaps with fear because it needed something to focus on besides my failed marriage. Still, the feeling of being watched never went away. The breaking point came back at the grocery store. I was checking out again, trying to act normal, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. The same cashier was there, the same cold stare. This time I couldn't take it. As she handed me my receipt, I asked her, quietly, politely, if I'd done something wrong. She leaned forward just enough that only I could hear her. "Get out of our town, witch." The word hit me like ice water. I laughed at first, a short, nervous sound that escaped before I could stop it. I thought she had to be joking. Some weird small-town superstition, a misunderstanding. But she wasn't smiling. Her eyes were burning into mine, full of something close to hatred. For a split second, I had this terrifying thought that if she could, she really would set me on fire right there between the candy bars and the magazines. I didn't say another word. I grabbed my bag and ran. I don't remember the walk home. I just remember my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was trying to claw its way out of my chest. I locked the door behind me and slid down against it, breathing like I'd just escaped something terrible. That night, I didn't sleep at all. Sometime after midnight, I heard knocking. Not on the door, on the window. 3 slow knocks. I sat straight up in bed, frozen. The knocking came again, calm, deliberate. Like whoever, or whatever, was out there knew I was awake and wasn't in a hurry. I forced myself to get up and look. Outside the window stood a man. He was facing away from me. I couldn't see his face, only his back. He was standing too close to the house, close enough that it made my skin crawl. I called out to him, my voice shaking, asking what he wanted. He didn't move. I called again, louder this time. Nothing. That's when fear took over completely. Something about the way he refused to turn around felt wrong in a way I can't fully explain. Like if I saw his face, something irreversible would happen. I ran. I slammed the door, locked every lock, and sat on the floor until morning with my back against the wall, listening for any sound that might mean he was still there. When the sun came up, I didn't pack carefully. I didn't say goodbye properly. I just knew I had to leave. On the bus out of town, the passengers looked at me the same way the cashier had, silent, watchful, like they were waiting for something. I stared straight ahead, counting the minutes until we crossed the state line, trying not to think about the 4 days I'd just lived through, and why none of it made sense. I thought leaving would fix it. that once I crossed that invisible line between states, whatever had happened in that town would loosen its grip on me. I kept telling myself it was stress, grief, a breakup layered on top of old memories. The human brain is good at playing tricks when it's overwhelmed, right? That's what I told myself as the bus rolled forward and the town disappeared behind the trees. But the feeling didn't leave with it. I stayed in a cheap motel that night, somewhere off the highway. I barely remember checking in. I just remember locking the door, pushing a chair under the handle, and sitting on the bed with my coat still on, staring at the wall like it might move if I looked away. Every sound made me jump. Ice rattling in the machine outside, a car door slamming. Footsteps in the hallway. Each one sent a jolt through my body, like my nerves were live wires. I didn't sleep, not really. I drifted in and out of shallow half-dreams where I was back in my grandmother's house, standing in the hallway, calling her name, and hearing my own voice echo back at me from somewhere too far away to reach. By morning, I felt hollow, like I'd left something important behind in that town without realizing it. I checked my phone. No missed calls. No messages. I opened my photos, almost without thinking, scrolling back to the pictures I'd taken during those 4 days. The porch, the kitchen table, a blurry shot of the sunset behind her house. Except, the dates didn't line up. Some photos were stamped with times that didn't make sense. Middle of the night shots I didn't remember taking. Others were missing entirely. Moments I could clearly remember, sitting at the table with my grandmother, laughing over coffee, had no photos at all. I told myself that didn't mean anything. Phones glitch, memories blur. Still, my hands were shaking as I drove home the next day. When I finally pulled into my own driveway, the house felt wrong. Too quiet, too empty, like it had been waiting for me, holding its breath. I dropped my bag by the door and stood there for a long time, listening. The familiar creaks, the hum of the fridge, all the sounds that used to mean safety. I expected relief. Instead, I felt like I'd brought something back with me. The first thing I did was call my husband. We hadn't talked much since the separation, mostly short, practical messages. Who was picking up what? Who needed to sign which paper? But suddenly, I needed to hear a voice I knew. He answered after a few rings. I asked him how he was. He said fine. Then he asked where I'd gone. I told him I'd visited my grandmother for a few days. There was a pause on the line, not a dramatic one, just long enough to feel off. Oh, he said slowly. That's good, I guess. I asked what he meant. He brushed it off, said he was busy, said we'd talk later. Then he hung up. That pause stuck with me. Over the next week, things started slipping. Small things at first. I'd reach for something and realize it wasn't where I remembered leaving it. I'd check the calendar and swear an appointment was written down, only to find nothing there. I'd wake up from naps convinced hours had passed, only to see it had been 10 minutes. I started keeping notes on my phone, just in case. But even the notes confused me. Some were written in a tone that didn't feel like mine, short, detached, almost clinical. Others were emotional, rambling, full of fear. I didn't remember writing either kind. Friends noticed something was wrong before I admitted it to myself. One of them asked how my trip had been. I started telling her about the town, the people, the cashier. I laughed nervously as I repeated the word witch, trying to make it sound ridiculous. She didn't laugh. She just stared at me with concern and asked if I was feeling okay. I told her I was just tired. But the truth was, I felt like I was splitting in two. At night, I started hearing sounds again. Not knocking, not rustling. Just the sense that something was happening while I slept, and I wasn't allowed to remember it. I'd wake up with my heart racing, convinced I'd been having a conversation I couldn't finish replaying in my head. Sometimes I'd find my phone unlocked, open to messages I hadn't sent, drafts with no words, just blank screens waiting for something. The worst part was my grandmother. I tried calling her. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again later. Same thing. I told myself she was old. Maybe she'd gone out. Maybe the reception was bad. That town was practically stuck in another decade. Still, the silence gnawed at me. I called a neighbor of hers I vaguely remembered. The number took a long time to ring. When someone finally answered, I explained who I was. There was another pause. Then the woman said very gently that she thought I must have the wrong number. I hung up before she could say anything else. That's when the panic really set in. I started Googling the town, the address, my grandmother's name. The results were sparse, old, outdated, and buried a few links down, I saw something that made my stomach drop. An obituary. I didn't click it at first. I couldn't. My brain refused to connect the dots. I told myself it had to be someone else with the same name. A coincidence. I closed my laptop and sat there, staring at my reflection in the dark screen. Part of me already knew, but I wasn't ready to hear it yet. I decided I needed help. Not because I believed any one explanation, but because nothing felt solid anymore. My memories, my sense of time, even my own reactions felt unreliable. So I made an appointment. I didn't tell anyone why. I just said I needed to talk. And that's where everything finally began to unravel. I didn't sleep the night before the appointment. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that man at the window again. His back turned, his refusal to face me, the way my body reacted before my mind had time to think. Pure fear, sharp and instinctive, like my brain recognized a danger it didn't want to explain. By morning, I felt wrung out, empty and buzzing at the same time. The waiting room was quiet, too quiet. One of those places where the air feels padded, like even your thoughts aren't allowed to echo too loudly. I sat there staring at a framed picture on the wall that I couldn't remember seeing before, even though I kept looking at it. The clock ticked. Every tick made me more aware of how badly my sense of time had started slipping. When my name was called, I stood up too fast and nearly lost my balance. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. The room itself was plain. A desk, 2 chairs, a window with the blinds half open. Nothing that should have scared me. And yet, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I told him everything. Not all at once. Not neatly. It spilled out of me in fragments. The separation, the trip, my grandmother's house, the staring, the word witch, the knocking, the man who wouldn't turn around, the bus ride out of town. I kept expecting him to interrupt me, to stop me and say this was impossible, or that I was clearly exaggerating, or that I needed to calm down. He didn't. He just listened. He didn't take notes at first. He just watched me, occasionally nodding, occasionally asking me to clarify a detail, not challenging it, just mapping it. When I finally stopped talking, my throat was raw, and my chest hurt like I'd been crying for hours, even though I hadn't shed a single tear. He leaned back slightly and said something I wasn't expecting. "Come back tomorrow." That was it. No reassurance, no explanation, no diagnosis. Just that. I left feeling unsettled, but also weirdly relieved, like I'd handed something heavy to someone else, even if only for a moment. That night, things got worse. I woke up on my couch, not my bed. I don't remember falling asleep there. The TV was on, muted, casting a pale blue glow across the room. My phone was in my hand, unlocked. On the screen was a message draft addressed to my grandmother. It was empty. No words. Just the blinking cursor, like it had been waiting for me to finish a thought I couldn't remember starting. I stared at it until my chest tightened and I had to put the phone down. The next morning, I went back. This time, he asked questions. Not about the town, not about the man, not even about the fear. He asked about timelines. He asked when my separation happened, the exact date. Not around spring or a few months ago. He wanted the day. I told him. He nodded, wrote something down. Then he asked about my grandmother, how her health had been the last time I saw her before the trip, whether she'd mentioned any appointments, any hospital stays. I told him she seemed fine. Old, yes, but strong in her own way, sharp, present. He didn't react. He asked my husband's name, how long we'd been married, how long we'd lived together before separating. Each question felt oddly specific, like he wasn't just listening, he was cross-checking. By the time he asked me the exact date of my divorce, I felt irritated. "I'm not divorced," I said. "We're separated." He paused, looked at his notes, then looked back at me. That's when the room felt like it tilted. He spoke carefully, slowly, like each word mattered more than the last. "You were divorced 5 years ago." I laughed. It came out too loud, too sharp, the kind of laugh people make when they think someone is testing them. "That's not possible," I said. "I'm 29. I've only been married once." He didn't argue. He turned the notebook toward me and slid it across the desk. Dates, records, names. I stared at them, my vision blurring around the edges. He continued, gently but firmly. "Your grandmother passed away 2 years ago." I couldn't breathe. The room went silent except for the sound of my own heartbeat roaring in my ears. I waited for him to say he was mistaken, that there had been a mix-up, that this was some kind of misunderstanding. He didn't. He explained things then, carefully, in terms that sounded distant and unreal, like they belonged to someone else's life. He used words I didn't fully understand at the time, terms about memory, identity, the mind protecting itself. A personality disorder, he said, dissociation, time loss. My brain had filled in gaps, created continuity where there was none, built a version of reality that felt safer than the truth. The town, the people, my grandmother. They weren't happening the way I remembered them. More than 2 months have passed since that day. I'm still trying to understand where I really was during those 4 days, what I saw, what I invented, and what parts of it, if any, were real. Because sometimes, late at night, I still hear rustling. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I'm back at that window, calling out, waiting for someone to turn around. After that second session, I stopped trusting my own instincts. That might sound dramatic, but once someone calmly tells you that years of your life don't line up the way you remember them, something fundamental breaks. It's not fear at first. It's doubt. Quiet, corrosive doubt that seeps into everything. I went home and pulled out old boxes, marriage documents, tax papers, photo albums. Things I had avoided looking at because they hurt too much, or so I thought. I sat on the floor for hours, surrounded by paper, trying to anchor myself to something solid. And slowly, painfully, I saw it. Dates that didn't match my memories. Photos of me standing alone in places I thought I'd visited with my husband. A holiday card signed only with my name from 3 years ago, even though I was convinced we were still together then. A folded condolence card at the bottom of a drawer, addressed to me, with my grandmother's name written in careful ink on the front. I didn't remember receiving it. I remembered calling her. I remembered hugging her. I remembered sitting at her kitchen table and drinking coffee. But none of that existed anywhere outside my head. The hardest part wasn't accepting that she was gone. The hardest part was realizing that my mind had brought her back without asking me. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing how often I checked out. Whole conversations would slip through me. I'd arrive somewhere and have no memory of the drive. I'd reread texts I had sent and feel like someone else had written them. The notes on my phone started to make more sense in a terrifying way. Some of them weren't meant for me. They were reminders written by a version of me who knew I'd forget. "You're safe now. Don't drive tonight. She's gone. Don't call." Reading those felt like being watched by myself. I went back for more sessions, not because I wanted answers anymore, but because I needed someone else to help hold reality steady. He explained how stress, grief, and unresolved trauma can fracture memory, how the brain can build entire environments to avoid pain it isn't ready to face. The town wasn't random, it was familiar, predictable, frozen in time. So was my grandmother. She didn't age, she didn't get sick, she didn't leave. And the hostility, the stares, the fear, those weren't people hunting me. They were cracks. My mind warning me that something didn't belong there. The man at the window haunted me the most. When I finally described him again in detail, My therapist asked a question that made my stomach twist. Did he ever try to hurt you? No. Did he ever speak? No. Did you feel like he wanted you to follow him? Yes. That's when he told me something I wasn't ready to hear. Sometimes when the mind creates a place to hide, it also creates a boundary, a figure that exists to keep you from going too far, from staying too long, from disappearing completely into the story. The knocking wasn't a threat. It was an alarm. The bus ride out of town wasn't escape. It was my brain finally letting me leave. That realization didn't bring peace. It brought grief all over again, because it meant those 4 days weren't a gift. They were a delay. I didn't visit my grandmother. I avoided saying goodbye. And even now, months later, I still catch myself wanting to go back, wanting to believe there's a version of her waiting on that porch, smiling like nothing ever changed. But then I remember the looks, the word, the fear, and I remind myself that staying there any longer might have meant never coming back at all. There's one more thing I haven't told anyone. Not my friends. Not even my therapist. Sometimes when I dream, I'm still in that house. And sometimes in the dream, I don't run from the window. Sometimes, I almost turn him around. I thought I was done telling this story. I really did. I thought part of healing was learning how to put a period at the end of something painful and letting it stay there. Accepting that not every mystery gets solved, not every wound closes neatly. I believed that if I kept going to sessions, kept grounding myself in facts and calendars and notes, eventually the past would stop slipping through my fingers. For a while, it almost worked. I made routines. I set alarms. I wrote things down obsessively. What day it was, what I ate, who I spoke to. Small anchors, scattered throughout the day, just in case my mind tried to drift again. Some days felt normal, boring even. I started to trust those days the most. And then there was one more moment. One day I sat down across from my psychologist and started talking about my husband. I told him that my husband had left me, that the separation still hurt, that sometimes it felt fresh all over again, like it had just happened. He didn't interrupt me. He listened the same way he always did, calm, focused, careful. When I finished, he hesitated. Then he said something that made my stomach drop in a slow, quiet way. "We've already talked about this," he said. "You came to me with this exact problem before." I laughed, automatically, the way you do when someone corrects you on a detail and you assume they're mistaken. "I don't think so," I said. "This is the first time I've brought it up like this." He shook his head gently. "No," he said. "You told me the same story weeks ago, almost word for word." The room felt farther away suddenly, like I was listening to him through water. I asked him what I had said last time. He told me, same pain, same confusion, same phrasing, same belief that the loss was recent, raw, unfinished. I stared at him, waiting for panic to hit. It didn't. What I felt was worse. Familiarity. A dull recognition, like hearing a song you don't remember learning, but somehow know all the words to. That was the first time it really occurred to me, not just intellectually, but deep in my bones, that this wasn't a single fracture. It was a pattern. I wasn't just losing memories from the past. I was losing memories as they formed. Experiences weren't disappearing years later. They were slipping away almost immediately, leaving behind the feeling without the event, the grief without the timeline, the pain without context. I asked him how many times it had happened. He didn't answer directly. He asked me how often I reread my notes, how often I felt like I was catching up on my own life, how often things felt emotionally familiar, but logically new. I didn't like where that was going. Now, when I write this, I don't know how much of it I'll remember tomorrow. I don't know if I'll read this back and feel like I'm reading someone else's confession. I don't know if the woman who sat on that bus, shaking as she left a town that may or may not have existed the way she remembers, will still feel like me. I keep thinking about that man at the window, not as a symbol, not as a warning, but as a question. Maybe he wasn't there to stop me from staying. Maybe he was there to make sure I noticed. Because the scariest part of all of this isn't the town, or the lost days, or even the dead coming back in memory. It's this quiet thought I can't shake. That one day, I might wake up and believe my husband just left me again, and again, and again. And maybe, by the time you're reading this, I don't remember any of it anymore.